So Patti, I really enjoyed the interview today with Ben from Maverick. I love what they're doing. I love this idea of kind of the ISO in a box and this, I think it, I had a conversation with a couple of people recently where I was like, is it just me or is it getting like so easy to start an ISO?
Mm-hmm.
So many services and you can outsource like everything. And it's just like, wow, like all you have to do is be able to make, get sales and you can outsource the rest. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, we have software as a service. We have hardware as a service.
Right.
We can have sales channel as a service, right? I mean,
it's crazy. It really is crazy.
But it's so compelling what they're doing. I think, for any small organization that wants to, a mom and pop sort of merchant services company could easily become an ISO, and without it really taking a whole lot of time and money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and then we move on to the questions from the field where I talk about training and kind of the balance between using training video content, which of course I'm very passionate about, but I realize that's definitely not the end all. And so video training together with taking action and kind of the purpose of training and how to use it to generate confidence and action and get deal count. And then I really was, again, surprised by your insiders report a little bit. So talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the CFPB has been had been sort of dormant for 4 or 5 years. We've seen it raising its head, putting out inquiries. It seems to want to have a real say in regulation of non-banks in the payment space. And I talk a little bit about that and relay some of the information that the CFPB has been relaying to Congress, which kind of gives us an idea of where it's going. And this episode, of course, is sponsored by Valor Paytech. You can check them out at ccsalespro.com/VALOR. James, What do you say we get into our episode?
Let's start it.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey everybody, Patti and I are here today with Ben Griefer. Ben is the Chief Operating Officer at Maverick Payments. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing well, James. How are you?
Doing fantastic. So very excited to talk to you today about scaling up an ISO, kind of this idea of ISO in a box. I love how it has become so much easier to become your own brand and to kind of scale out your operation versus what it was 12, 13 years ago when I got into the business. But before we dive into that super interesting topic, Ben, I want to hear your backstory and a little bit about Maverick. So how did you get into this crazy industry? And tell us a little bit of Maverick story as well, since I know you're integral to that.
Yeah, so I got into the business over 10 years ago. We're family owned, operated. My dad actually got me in the business. He started another full service ISO back in 2000. And around 10 years ago is when we spun off, we started Maverick. I started in sales. Which is why a lot of our focus is kind of on the sales aspect of empowering, our agents and ISOs. As the COO, I'm involved in, a little bit of everything. I heavily focus with our kind of strategic partners, so our agents, ISOs, that whole process, and a lot of our underwriting risk operations as well.
Cool. So I want to just dive into this topic and right off the bat is as we're talking about small ISOs, right? And so this could be an individual agent who is starting to like bring on a little bit of staff or bring on a sub agent. And they're kind of starting to think, like, wait a second, I think this could be a business. This doesn't have to just be a sales gig. This could actually be a business. I'm just curious in your mind, when and why should they consider, promoting their own brand and kind of starting to go out on their own? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, I mean, you kind of said it, right? Is you can make a legitimate business out of this, even as a sales organization. And how I look at it is, focus your time and energy on what obviously has the highest return. If you're a salesperson, whether you're individual or you have sub agents underneath you, you should be spending a majority of your time working with potential merchants and existing merchants. And that's really been our focus, is kind of sitting behind agent offices and ISO organizations to make sure they have the support from start to finish to grow their portfolio.
Yeah. So along those lines, and this is one of my favorite kind of debates. I have my opinion. Everybody has their opinion, but this idea of like, okay, we want to scale, right? We're a one-person shop. What do we do first? Do we hire the admin staff? Do I get somebody to do my installs and customer service and my schedule? Or do I start by hiring 2 or 3 sub agents? Like what are your thoughts, or what are you seeing in the market today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how resources and time is allocated. I would say generally we see most of the agent offices out there are a little bit more sales heavy than operations, but you need to have that good balance where as a salesperson, you're not draining time doing
Right.
customer service. There's
Right.
times you have to do that because you have relationships with these merchants, but ultimately you want to be focusing on growing the business. And
Right.
that's where you have to have that good balance and then understand what type of businesses are you supporting? Is it card present, card not present? Do you need additional people to help with terminals, or is it primarily payment gateways? How could a company like us come in and assist with things like that, where you can leverage our customer service, our technical support? And we've taken a very kind of non-intrusive approach where agents and sub-ISOs of ours don't feel threatened by introducing, quote unquote, Maverick. We will come in as a fully branded kind of extension of that office so that they could fully leverage us. And a lot of the times they don't need to bring on as many operational people as they might think they do.
Yeah, that's a great point, because a lot of times, the reason that they're bringing in, employees is to protect their own brand, to say, well, I don't want my merchant speaking to a different company. I want them to have the full experience of me. And I think the other thing, Ben, as you probably have seen, is even when that exists, there's still that concern with a lot of companies that they're going to receive a poor experience. And it's like almost worse, like, don't use my name. You're going to put them on hold for 30 minutes before you talk to them, So talk about that. I know it's a little bit off the beaten path there, but I mean, is that something you've seen as a concern for these smaller ISOs? And I assume that's something where Maverick, as you mentioned, has a little bit of a specialty there.
Oh, for sure. It's a reciprocal relationship. So if a merchant has a bad experience with us, it's going to reflect on the agent who brought that merchant to us, right? So we focus a lot on white glove support because how I look at our industry, it's all relationship based. Us with our sales offices, and then ultimately the sales offices with the merchants who kind of come full circle back to us. So you need to have that kind of all-in-one solution where the support is good, the statements are transparent, the deployment is, it's simple and quick, or else there's going to be one kind of friction point, which kind of ultimately causes one person or both, whether it's the agent and or the merchant, not to have a great experience. And obviously we're in a competitive industry where you have to have everything really buttoned up.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So this is such a great kind of lead in where I want to go with this conversation, because I really want to get granular and I want to talk about the experience of the merchant, and really the sales partner, of course, along this journey, but kind of this journey of like getting a merchant on board, signing them up. So let's start at the very, very, very beginning. So we've got to generate interest. We've got to generate leads. Now, we all know feet on the street, walking into the business, doing the cold calls, very effective, can be very effective if you're good at sales. But I'm curious what you're seeing, Ben, as you see these ISOs start to grow a little larger, they start to scale. Do they shift more to affiliate, referral, paid marketing? What are you seeing that's working in the industry as far as lead generation and generating interest?
Yeah, I would say a lot of what we're seeing is, paid advertising, whether it's through channels like Google AdWords, and then also a lot of referral channels. So depending on, if it's card present, maybe something like cash discount, that's going to be a very different kind of lead source and lead generation than maybe an agent office who's working card not present, maybe high risk. But ultimately, a lot of it's going digital and a lot of it's strong referral partners. We do see, feet on the street. I would say that's a little bit more old school, and I think it's a little bit more difficult, especially after COVID, to have such, a high success rate, maybe compared to something like hot leads coming in through Google AdWords.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to, Ben, talk about the sales process itself. Okay.
Yep.
Like, what are some of the challenges that these ISOs face, in terms of hiring, training and activating their sales staff, and what are some of the approaches and tips that you would give them, that might help them through this process?
I think a lot of them have a lacking of the right technology, and they struggle with, the tools they need, especially to their kind of downstream sub-agent channel, to have just an easy onboarding with their merchants. I think a lot of them end up just wasting time dealing with paperwork. And we've done a lot of, our emphasis about the technology, just making it much more of a seamless kind of frictionless process, which really just saves time for the agent and automates a lot of the processes.
And so,
Yeah.
and so like following up on that, I would say, first of all, what is some of this technology specific? What I'm interested more is the sales process itself. And I could be wrong, but I think you guys actually have some tech along almost like CRM or something along those lines. Or, talk about that a little bit as far as how do you enable them, to when they're actually during the sales flow before they get the yes. What kind of tech do you have along those lines, Ben?
Yeah, so our system is completely kind of workflow end-to-end driven. You can take in leads. You can have simple embedded forms that you could throw on your website, automatically convert them into applications, and the whole process is digital. So, historically, an agent, they get a statement from a merchant, right? They do a cost statement analysis, they present that pricing to the merchant, and there's kind of several steps back and forth. You're going to get a blank merchant application, put in those fees you presented, send it to the merchant. They're going to print it out, sign it, scan it, send it back, or send it to the agent to send it through something like DocuSign. So our system automates all of those kind of friction points, eliminating the back and forth. You create an app in our digital system. It can be fully branded. You put in the pricing. You could send it to the merchant. It'll tell them what fields they need to complete. They'll automatically be prompted to sign with their cursor, and it goes into our underwriting queue. So they don't have to worry about, say, these 2, 3, maybe 4 steps back and forth, and it's fully branded. So the entire experience is white labeled for that sales partner. And then a lot of the times they're eliminating cost. They're not having to pay for a vendor like DocuSign because our e-signature comes as part of our system, and there's no cost for it. They could also set up unlimited sub-agents that have the same access and kind of flexibility. So they can do the same thing with the master agent, whatever you want to call them, the admin ultimately, being able to have all the visibility they need.
So one of the things I want to break down here that I realized actually I didn't have this written down on my question list, but I want to find out because I know a lot of people would be curious when you talk about a white labeled solution where they're promoting their brand. I think a lot of people would be a little confused by that just because they're thinking, okay, so I have to be a registered ISO in order to experience this. Talk about that and the actual requirements and then how you're able to kind of pull that off because obviously normally they would have to be registered to use their brand. So talk a little bit about how that works and the requirements there.
So there's a lot of, systems out there where you can kind of digitize a fillable PDF, really that's, ultimately a traditional PDF on the back end. So that's all we've done is we've, white labeled this onboarding kind of form where it's generating a PDF on the back end. And within the e-signature process, all of the disclosures are there, that Maverick is ultimately the ISO. But merchants, a lot of the times they just get confused when you're talking from ABC Merchant Services and then you send them a PDF from Maverick. So we've been able to kind of converge this process so that the onboarding process, kind of shows how both parties are involved with one another, as Maverick is kind of this back end, technology payment processing company, and the agent ultimately is kind of this front end sales organization where we work together, to fully support these merchants from start to finish.
And to clarify that, go ahead, Patti.
Go ahead. No, I was going to clarify too, so you go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say to clarify, you don't have to be a registered ISO in order to do that.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And
there's other CRMs out there that have a similar experience. Where we've been successful is really from a cost perspective, right? When you look at a lot of the software companies out there that have kind of a SaaS model, they're charging per seat or per user. So if you have, say, 10 or 15 sub-agents, you might end up paying a couple $1,000s a month just in software fees. Then you throw in DocuSign. So our system eliminates all of that because ultimately we're looking to bring on, the merchant as a client, and we've built all this technology in-house. So we have a lot of flexibility with our cost. To us, it's an investment to go out and be able to, bring on these agents with supporting them and kind of empowering them with the tools they need. So you say, early on, ISO in a box. This is kind of an ISO in a box solution, which ultimately is making their lives a lot easier, and it's a lot more scalable for them as well.
Right. But just to clarify on the branding, if you don't mind, Ben, I'd list.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is like ABC Merchant Services. So like if I was the merchant and I'm receiving the application, right, to sign,
Mhm.
it's going to be some, electronic PDF form that up on the top will say ABC Merchant Services and Patty Murphy, right?
Yep.
Agree, blah, blah, blah. And then somewhere else within the text, it refers to Maverick as sort of the back end. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
Yep.
'cause
Exactly.
I mean, to me, that seems like a really important consideration in terms of diluting your brand. You don't want to dilute your brand by bringing in these other names. So what you're saying is the brand's going to be up top, Maverick's going to be someplace down lower.
Exactly. And that's what we've wanted to accomplish ultimately. We wanted
Mm-hmm.
our agents to feel really confident in the solution and not, have any kind of like hesitancy where they're like, oh, maybe we don't want to do this because it's more of a co-branded solution, or
Right.
there's still going to be questions from the merchant on who Maverick is. When they get the whole onboarding process emailed to them, it's all branded in a way where it's just very kind of fluid and it's very
Mm-hmm.
easy to explain.
Mm-hmm.
And you eliminate a lot of friction that you traditionally would have in kind of the older school
Right.
onboarding process.
Sure. Sure. Great. No.
So once we get this beautiful branded white labeled agreement signed and we send this in, right? Talk about the underwriting. I know you guys have a bit of a different approach here, especially as it relates to maybe medium to higher risk type accounts, but talk about your underwriting process and maybe what you've done there that you feel like is beneficial to some of these offices that are looking to scale.
Yeah, so we kind of split it up between, the traditional quote unquote lower risk merchants, and then yes, we do have the ability to support higher risk. So low risk to us is, it's very quick, it's very easy. We've done a lot of integration with other technology tools out there to identify, the identity of the businesses, the owners, bank account authentication, where
Mm-hmm.
ultimately a lot of the times all we need is that digitally signed application, and we can do all the verification we need on the back end for a very quick and easy approval. The system will, pretty much prompt the merchant on what documents are most likely needed based on transaction method, monthly volume. The whole onboarding is dynamic. So if you put, the principal owns 10%, it's going to ask them for a second one. We've built it so it's very, kind of dumbed down to the merchant, where it walks them through what information is needed. And when it comes into our underwriting process, we've automated so many of the, traditional kind of junior underwriting type items with the KYC inquiries,
Mm-hmm.
those types of things, ultimately allowing us to onboard accounts quicker. And we've done a lot of automation too on the back end when we onboard accounts to get, the VAR sheets issued quicker, the accounts boarded, quicker. Ultimately, terminals can get deployed faster because nowadays people are so used to dealing with technology where nearly everything is instant. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're trying to emulate here as well.
Instantaneousness. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then, you get the account through underwriting, it gets approved, and now we've got to get this equipment out. I would imagine that, one of the probably interesting things about what Maverick does is that you're working with all these individual offices. And I would imagine that a lot of them have different opinions about how involved or uninvolved they want you to be as it relates to installation and onboarding and things of that nature. So talk about how you kind of navigate that for us.
Yeah, so we've done a really good job at having kind of a customizable approach. So we have some larger offices, they might be doing higher end point of sale systems. So they're doing a lot of the deployment themselves.
Right.
And we'll have others where, maybe they're doing cash discount, we're deploying simple standalone deja vus. So we can be fully dynamic in a way where, again, our goal is ultimately to accomplish them.
Right.
We even could brand incoming calls. So we have certain offices where when you call their toll-free number, there's an option for support that forwards to us. And when that comes through our phone system, it actually shows what agent that is so we can pick up on their behalf. So for us, it's not cookie cutter. It's very much a way to support how their process works based on their clientele, and ultimately how their entire solution is positioned to the merchant.
Yeah, yeah. Because that was the question I was going to bring up, because it seems to me that support can kind of be tricky when you have these ISOs that each have their own sort of different ways and requirements along this way. So what you're saying is, even though it's automated, it's not a cutter approach. There's some sort of like intelligence in the background that can modify these to keep the brand ever so in front of the client.
Correct. I mean, how we've taken our kind of position is we're really behind every office we have in any capacity they want us to support them. We have some agents, if a merchant wants to cancel, we do full retention for them. We have others where if the merchant calls us, asking about fees or statement questions, whatever it is, they get forwarded to that office. Other offices, you hit 5 for support, for example. When you call their toll-free number, it comes into us, we pick up on their behalf. So we fully
Right.
customize, based on what that ISO is looking for. Because to me, you can't really apply a cookie cutter approach. Every agent office
Right.
out there is doing something completely different to differentiate themselves from other agents. They're working with,
Right.
retail versus card not present. Even the card present world is different with,
Sure.
standalone terminals versus high-end POS. So everything needs to be customizable so that it really supports ultimately what that agent and their solution is, being sold to the merchant.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Last question for you, Ben. Any final kind of insights, when you think about, your position is, I think, interesting because you've worked with so many of these kind of up and coming, aspiring, individual agents or small ISOs that are trying to grow and scale. Anything in particular that stands out to you about the ones that actually pull it off versus the ones that don't, that you'd share with our audience?
Yeah, I would say the ones that we've seen are really successful have very good operational processes in place and staffing. Whether they want us to come on, kind of come on and help with support or deployment, whatever it is, they at least have the processes really ironed out. Where to the merchant, it's a streamlined process, whether we're doing support or they are. Where we've seen, kind of just scalability, I guess, growing pains and issues is they're too top heavy with sales, where they ultimately can't deliver a good experience to the merchant, whether it's facilitated through us or done in house. Other than that, it's been really successful. We've also built, the ability for them to set up other, kind of manager, admin level type people, whether they have customer service manager, a controller doing the residuals, whatever it is, so they could have all the proper permissions in place. You could even have a sub agent office get their own white label. So we have some larger offices, for example, that might have inside sales people, and then they could have another, 5 branched off individual offices that have their own white labeling. So it's a lot of flexibility on our end, and that's where we've been successful, is just kind of helping these offices mold a solution that really is built around how their, sales model works.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Well,
stuff.
Yeah, Ben, it's been very, very insightful. I'm sure a lot of people in our audience are going to want to learn more about Maverick, learn more about you. Where would you send them to find out more about your programs?
Yeah, so either maverickpayments.com or sales@maverichq.com, HQ as in headquarters.
Got it. Awesome. Love it. Ben, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time to share your insights with our audience today. I know they got a lot of value out of it, as did I. So thanks again for taking the time.
I learned a lot, Ben. Thanks.
Thank you.
So Patti, of course, this episode brought to you by Valor Paytech, ccsalespro.com/VALOR. New integration announcements. They're working right now. Valor's getting really close at the time of this recording to announcing integration with EPX and EPI.
Oh, excellent.
2 of the most popular ones. And they already have so many integrations with various platforms.
Right.
And I think that's one thing that really sets them apart. I think there's an interesting kind of dichotomy right now in the industry between processing companies who want to build technology versus just integrating with processor agnostic technology companies. Right. And so far, I would definitely say that the processor agnostic technology companies are winning this particular battle. Not that, that's not to say that there aren't processing companies that are doing well with technology, but there's some really good stuff. And I think Valor is a great example of that, where, for the agent out there, I mean, you can literally make, you can really get a great technology suite. As an ISO, you can provide a technology suite to your agents that's fully integrated with whatever platform you're working with. And so if you wonder if your platform is currently supported and integrates with the Valor suite of omnichannel technology solutions, just head over to ccsalespro.com/VALOR, request a demo, check it out.
I think you'll like it.
And now, here is questions from the field with James Shepard.
So Patti, today I just want to talk about training. And I want to talk specifically about video training and in the field training. We have a great episode coming up. I believe it's next week with Logan Peters from Beyond, where we talk a little bit more about how they're training.
Right.
But, I'm kind of the king of video training in the industry right now.
Of course.
I have my 6-week jumpstart program, which has got, 35 hours. I know you've taken a look at it as well.
Oh yeah. It's at least 35 hours.
Yes. It's a lot. Feels like 60.
Feels like 100. But
so I have a lot of training out there, and I think there's a tendency to go extreme here. And people will say, well, I'm just going to watch lots of video. And then other ISOs are like, well, that's a waste of time. We're just going to send them out in the field and let them get started. So I want to talk about the key and kind of this cycle of learning that you want people to go through in order to really effectively train them. So, the first step is they do need to go through extensive training up front, because they're going to need that to have the confidence to be able to get out in the field.
And the concepts.
And the concepts, yes.
Right.
And I think everybody is a little bit different in this area. There are some agents salespeople, show me 2 hours of content, 2-hour webinar, and I'm ready to go hit the ground and see, see what this is all about. Right. Other people like me want to be more the expert. And so they're going to want to go through a lot more. But no matter what I found is kind of similar is when people go through a pretty significant amount of training up front, and, for the 6-week jumpstart, I have about probably 12 hours of video content that really goes through kind of the whole industry. And it's a lot of information. And you might think, well, that's information overload. And you're right. They're not going to remember more than 20% of it. Right. But the way that it makes you feel, and this is what psychologists have told us about training content, the way it makes you feel is I'm an expert. I've gone through all this video. 12 hours. I know what I'm talking about. I'm ready to go. And that's the confidence they need to take action. So there's an initial amount. Now you could do that with kind of in-person, training for a 2-day thing. You could do it with my video training and white label our learning management system and go, design your course based on my content there. But the idea is they need that upfront training that gives them the confidence to take action. They go and take action. Well, then what happens when they take action is they realize they don't know as much as they thought.
Right.
They realize they forgot a lot of stuff, but it gives them awareness as well. So when they go through the video training, they have that awareness to say, I think I remember watching a video that James said about this. So the merchant says, the merchant might say, I keep seeing on my statement this, level 2 fee on here. What is that? And it only takes one time for the agent to kind of think, that's a great question. I'm going to check on that and get back to you. Right. And they're like, what was that? I remember James talked about that. Then they go into our searchable learning management system. They already watched all these videos up front. They search level 2. They see my videos on interchange optimization.
Right.
They watch it. This is why I'm a big believer in short videos.
Bite size.
Yeah. You do a 2-hour webinar and record it. People have a question, they come back. They're not going to watch the whole 2 hours again to find that one thing. So you want to have short videos, not because it's more effective initially, but because it's searchable. Right. So then the people can come back later. They can search the content and, oh yeah, there's that video course. There's that video on that one topic that I needed to see again. Right. So that's the way you want it. Is you want this back and forth to where you have a block of training up front. Then that training leads into action. And that's a constraint. And this, Patti, going through the 6-week jumpstart training, when you get to about 12 hours in, I'm very clear. That's the end of day 2 training. Day 3
now you need to go out.
Take action. Go out. If you're not going to prospect, stop right here.
Right.
Don't do anything else, because now we're going to get into advanced topics that you're not going to understand at all if you don't have the foundation of going out in the field, selling merchants, understanding what that's like. And so you get to a point where you take action, and then they're going to come back and rewatch some of the initial stuff and kind of get the foundation. Then and only then they're ready to move forward. So it's that cycle of training, then action, then circling back with questions where they're going to search the training they already watched to really internalize it. They take more action. Then they're going to get to a point where they say, I want to learn more so I can grow. Well, now you provide more videos, and they do, so it's that process of training, taking action, searching, taking action, training, so it's going round and round like that. And so I think when you approach it that way and design your process around that, I think it can be very, very effective.
I think so too. Thanks, James.
This is the Insider's Report with Patti Murphy.
So, James, I know we've discussed this a little bit in the past, but the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has its sights set on big tech.
Right.
Now, the CFPB, as it's known, was created under the Dodd-Frank Act. That's law gave the Bureau, among other things, authority to supervise non-banks whose activities the Bureau has reasonable cause to determine pose risk to consumers.
That's a pretty broad definition.
Pretty broad. It's not specific to any particular consumer financial product at all.
Right.
So last fall, kind of banking on this, pardon the pun.
I was about to say, yeah.
The Bureau sent letters out to big tech, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, and Block, I believe, were all the ones inquiring about their consumer payments activities. And, we kind of talked about this as, sort of like opening the door to regulation, which it seems is true because in April, the CFPB said it would begin looking at fintechs to determine the risks they pose to consumers and in order to help them level the playing field between banks and non-banks.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting language.
Yeah. And it all came up during a hearing. One of the things about, one of the things I learned when I was covering Washington was all these most boring hearings in the world are always the ones where the agency heads have to come into the committee that has jurisdiction over, the congressional committee that has jurisdiction and report on what they're doing.
Right.
But sometimes when you read these things, they're very interesting. And so I thought this was interesting in the testimony that CFPB Director Rohit Chopra said last month. To the Senate Banking Committee. He said, quote, he said this in April when he was talking about big tech. He said, quote, given the rapid growth of consumer offerings by non-banks, the CFPB is now utilizing a dormant authority to hold non-banks to the same standards that banks are held up to, is what he said. So,
wow.
And I think this kind of goes back to, the CFPB was created under the Dodd-Frank Act, but it never really got its wings, so to speak, until like 2012, 2013. Well, by the time 2016 rolls around, we have a new president who didn't really like the CFPB that much and sort of like diminished its authority. So now it's, under Biden administration, of course, CFPB was created. It was a favored product by Elizabeth Warren, who's part of the Democratic hierarchy. So I think it stands to reason that we're going to see more action like this.
Yeah.
And there were a couple items. So he had to give this testimony on what the agency is up to in May. And a couple items from his testimony, I think, provide some insight on where the Bureau is headed. Basically what he said was that without regulation, the U.S. could be headed toward a consolidated market structure where big tech calls all the shots. And here's the quote that really struck me. He said, quote, currently, the United States is lurching towards a consolidated market structure where finance and commerce commingle, fueled by uncontrolled flows of consumer data. Wow. He likened it to the market structure in China, where Alipay and WeChat Pay dominate.
Right.
And he said, quote, the outsized influence of such dominant tech conglomerates over the financial services system comes with risks and raises a host of questions about privacy, fraud, discrimination, and more. And he said that, this information that they're gathering from big tech, quote, will contribute to the critical policy discussions about the future of consumer finance and relationship banking in our country. Now, I really caught on to that word also, relationship banking, because that's sort of it is a consumer relationship, but it's also business relationships, right?
Right.
So another interesting comment that Chopra made, pertain to businesses that might seem to be outside of its jurisdiction. And he said that the Bureau is, quote, engaging with a broad range of other businesses and associations, close quote, including retailers as it plots its future initiatives. Quote, while these industries generally engage in business practices that fall outside the scope of the CFPB's authority, they are deeply affected by the laws the agency administers. Now, I read this, as if, CFPB could enter the war of words over interchange.
For sure.
And, only time will tell, but it sure.
Yeah, definitely seems like the number of kind of enemies are mounting to the kind of status quo of the way things are done.
Yeah. And I just, like I said, I was reading through this testimony and I thought, there's some really interesting undercurrents there. And,
for sure.
And I do believe that that's something we should look out for. I mean, on the one hand, as sort of a pro banking kind of person, the banking franchise on payments, it's always worried me to see these big tech companies getting involved in payments without the proper regulatory authority.
Right.
On the other hand, if it takes its
if they get regulated, we get regulated.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Well, a lot of things to follow with this stuff, and I'm sure you'll keep us in the loop.
Sure will.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.